As we journey through life and approach those later stages, it's natural to reflect on where true peace and happiness lie. Have you ever found yourself pondering what life will look like as you grow older? Will your fulfillment come from following the long-held tradition of living close to your children and grandchildren? Or is there a deeper, more personal path that calls to you? One where you embrace your independence and continue to thrive in your golden years on your own terms? These questions resonate deeply with many of us, and today, we're about to explore powerful stories that offer fresh, soul-stirring perspectives on what it means to live a truly fulfilled life as we age. The journey to understanding where true peace and happiness reside doesn't follow a one-size-fits-all approach. Each story invites you to reflect, feel, and discover your own path. A path that honors both your independence and the wisdom that comes with age. So, as we dive into these inspiring stories, we encourage you to listen with an open heart, to let the lessons sink in, and to think deeply about what fulfillment means to you as you approach this chapter of life. But before we start, we would love for you to be part of our growing community. If you find value in these discussions, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who may need to hear these messages, and follow our channel for more inspiring content that helps you reflect on life's most meaningful questions. Your journey to peace, happiness, and wisdom begins here. Let's explore it together. The first story we want to share with you revolves around a situation that many families face, especially as parents grow older and look for ways to remain close to their children. It's a story about the challenges that arise when generations live under the same roof, highlighting how well-meaning intentions can sometimes lead to unexpected difficulties. Picture this: a couple with two sons who, as they approached their senior years, envisioned a future where they'd live with one of their children. It wasn't just about security or convenience for them. It was about the warmth of family, the comfort of shared meals, and the joy of being part of their grandchildren's daily lives. They dreamed of maintaining that sense of connection as they aged. Their younger son seemed to share in this vision. He was thoughtful and, perhaps more than his older brother, felt a sense of responsibility to ensure his parents were cared for in their later years. As he approached marriage, he even considered how well potential partners might get along with his parents. He wasn't just thinking about his own happiness, but the future harmony of the household. Now, this approach may sound noble, even selfless, but in reality, it planted the seeds of tension. When decisions are based on trying to meet the expectations of others, especially when it comes to something as personal as marriage, the balance can easily tip into conflict. After a series of relationships that didn't receive his parents' approval, sometimes for reasons as simple as cultural differences or modern values, this younger brother finally met a woman who seemed to meet all the requirements. She was respectful, traditional, and shared many of the family's values. In their minds, she was the perfect match for him and would fit seamlessly into their lives. But as we often see, the early optimism that surrounds such arrangements doesn't always last. Life has a way of revealing cracks in even the best-laid plans. After they married, the couple moved in with his parents. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. Everyone was on their best behavior, trying to make the situation work. But as time passed, subtle differences in lifestyle and expectations started to emerge. These weren't earth-shattering issues at first. They were the kind of small frustrations that tend to build up over time. For instance, the parents had always valued the tradition of eating together as a family every evening. It was something they held dear, a time for bonding and sharing stories from the day. But their son and his wife, juggling demanding jobs and social commitments, often found it difficult to stick to this routine. They didn't see dinner as the sacred ritual his parents did, and this began to cause friction. From the parents' perspective, this change in tradition felt like a rejection. They started to interpret their son and daughter-in-law's absence at the dinner table as a sign of disrespect, though that wasn't the younger couple's intention. These small disappointments, left unspoken, began to fester. And when unspoken expectations aren't addressed, they have a way of transforming into larger conflicts over time. Things escalated after the couple had their first child. Now, anyone who's been around new parents and grandparents knows that differences in parenting styles can spark serious tension. The grandmother in this story, like many women of her generation, relied on traditional methods of raising children, methods that had been passed down through her family. She believed in her experience and wanted to pass that wisdom on to her daughter-in-law. But her daughter-in-law, a modern woman who preferred science-based approaches to childcare, didn't appreciate the constant advice. To her, it felt like interference. And so, what began as well-meaning guidance quickly turned into a tug-of-war between tradition and modernity. These differences in parenting philosophies created a deep rift between the two women. The grandmother, feeling dismissed, believed her knowledge was being undervalued, while the daughter-in-law felt suffocated by unsolicited advice. As you can imagine, the tension in the house grew palpable. The son, caught in the middle of this conflict, found himself torn between his loyalty to his wife and the duty he felt toward his parents. This is a situation many people can relate to, the feeling of being pulled in two directions, trying to keep the peace while knowing that something has to give. The pressure continued to mount. Small disagreements turned into larger arguments. The atmosphere in the house, once filled with hope and optimism, became heavy with resentment. Living under the same roof, without clear boundaries or communication, magnified every issue. And here's where we see one of the biggest challenges of multigenerational living. The lack of space, both physical and emotional, makes it harder to let frustrations cool off. There's no room to breathe, no opportunity to step back and gain perspective. Eventually, the couple made a difficult decision. They realized that living with the parents was no longer sustainable for their relationship or their mental health. Moving out wasn't what anyone had originally wanted, but it became necessary for preserving the bond between the son, his wife, and his parents. Sometimes, distance can actually strengthen relationships by giving each party the space to reflect and regain their emotional equilibrium. So, what can we take away from this story? One key lesson is that no matter how much we love our families, living together requires more than just goodwill. It requires clear communication, established boundaries, and most importantly, an understanding that generations often have different perspectives on life. What one generation sees as a tradition or a duty, another might see as a burden or an outdated practice. These differences don't make either side wrong, but they do highlight the need for compromise and mutual respect. Another important takeaway is that expectations, when unspoken, can become toxic. If the parents in this story had expressed their feelings earlier, or if the son and his wife had been more proactive in discussing their boundaries, some of the conflicts might have been avoided. Families thrive on open dialogue. It's not enough to assume that love will smooth over every disagreement. Sometimes, it takes hard conversations to prevent resentment from taking root. Then, this story reminds us that it's okay to adjust our expectations. The dream of living close to our children in our old age might not always unfold the way we imagined, and that's okay. It doesn't mean the relationship is broken. It just means that different circumstances call for different solutions. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is space to grow and the freedom to live their own lives. By understanding these dynamics and being willing to adapt, we can avoid the heartache of unmet expectations and instead cultivate relationships built on mutual respect and understanding. And perhaps in doing so, we create an environment where both generations can thrive, together or apart. Let us tell you about a remarkable family living in Paris, with a mother named Elise at the heart of it all. Elise and her husband have shared many decades of life together, creating a legacy of love and togetherness that now radiates through the lives of their children and grandchildren. Their family has grown to include 18 members across 2 generations, and though each household has its own space, they've made a conscious effort to stay deeply connected. Elise's home has become a place where everyone comes to feel at ease, a haven, really, where the walls seem to hold the warmth of countless shared moments. Every evening, without fail, the family comes together in Elise's home for dinner. Though each household has its own kitchen, when it's time to eat, they prefer to be side by side. They sit around a large table, sharing meals they've each prepared, exchanging stories of their day. The conversations flow effortlessly, with laughter rising in the air like a familiar melody. For Elise, these dinners are not just about filling their stomachs. They are about feeding the soul, about reminding each other that no matter how busy life becomes, they are all bound by something far deeper than proximity. Some of the children and grandchildren live in neighboring homes, close enough to visit without effort. Others have moved further away, but regardless of distance, they all return. To them, Elise's home is more than just a place. It's a sanctuary, a safe harbor where they can come after a hard day, weary from the challenges of life. They know they'll always find solace there, a comforting word, and a gentle embrace waiting for them, no matter how long it's been since their last visit. Each week, the family holds a larger gathering, something Elise initiated many years ago. These gatherings have become the glue that holds them together. They serve as moments of reflection where every family member can pause, share their victories and their struggles, and feel the support of a loving community. Elise believes deeply in the value of these moments, not because they are a duty, but because they are a reminder of the importance of shared experience and connection. Her husband, Mr. Q, often watches from his chair, observing the family he helped build with a quiet pride. He knows that it's not the dinners or the gatherings themselves that bring everyone together. It's the feeling of belonging that pulls them back time and again. For him, the true reward of this close-knit life is seeing the happiness in his children's and grandchildren's faces, knowing that they have a safe place to return to when the world feels too heavy. It gives him peace of mind, knowing he can still offer them wisdom and support as they navigate their own lives. As you might imagine, Elise's life hasn't been without its share of challenges. The fear of loneliness as one grows older is something she's familiar with, as many are. When you reach a certain age, your social circle begins to shrink, and you start relying more on the family you've built. For some, the thought of living without that constant connection is unbearable. Yet Elise knows from her own experience that living in the same house isn't always the answer. Over the years, she's seen families where parents and children live under the same roof but grow more distant emotionally. In those cases, the physical closeness doesn't always foster the connection they crave. It can even create tension as the pressures of sharing space day in and day out build up. Elise has witnessed this firsthand and realized early on that true connection isn't just about being close in proximity. It's about being close in heart. That's why Elise and her husband chose a different path. They decided to live near their children but not with them, maintaining a balance between closeness and independence. For them, this choice has been ideal. It gives them the freedom to live their lives on their own terms while still having the comfort of knowing their family is just a few steps away. And for their children, it provides a space to grow their own families while keeping the bonds with their parents strong and vibrant. For Elise, this balance has been key to preserving the harmony in their relationships. By living nearby but not together, she's been able to stay involved in her children's and grandchildren's lives without the friction that can sometimes arise from too much togetherness. It's allowed her to be there when they need her, without feeling like she's overstepping or losing her own sense of self. Her children, too, appreciate the space this arrangement provides. They know that they can visit as often as they like, help out when needed, and still have the freedom to live their own lives. And for Elise, this is the essence of peace, being close enough to offer support but distant enough to preserve the respect and autonomy that every individual needs. Elise often reflects on how different families navigate this stage of life. She understands that not every parent or child will find the same arrangement suitable. Some may choose to live under the same roof. Others may prefer more distance. What truly matters is finding a situation that fosters love and respect, one that brings more joy than tension. For Elise, the weekly gatherings and shared dinners are just the outward expressions of something much deeper, a lifelong commitment to keeping her family united. In the end, the decision about where to live in old age is intensely personal. It's not something that can be dictated by societal expectations or the opinions of others. It's about what brings you peace, what fills your heart with joy. Elise and Mr. Q found that peace by creating a structure that works for them. A life where they can still offer love and guidance while giving their children the freedom to lead their own paths. For Elise, family is not about where you live, but about how you live together. It's the little moments, the shared meals, the knowing glances, and the quiet understanding that no matter where life takes you, there is always a place where you belong. And as she looks around her table at the faces of those she loves most, she knows she's found exactly what she was looking for: a life full of love, connection, and the joy of being surrounded by family. The second story that helps you find comfort and independence starts with David and Emma. David and Emma were parents of 2 grown sons, both of whom lived and worked in the bustling city of Hanoi. It surprised many when they decided not to live with either son, even though their children were eager to welcome them into their homes. You see, David and Emma had learned something important over the years. Independence, even in old age, is a form of freedom worth holding on to. When their eldest son, Jack, got married, David and Emma gently encouraged him and his wife to establish their own household. Emma, having once been a daughter-in-law herself, knew firsthand the subtle tensions that can arise when multiple generations live under one roof. She understood how differences in daily routines, habits, and expectations could lead to conflict. So from the start, they made it clear, when their sons married, it was time for them to build their own nests. 3 years ago, their younger son, Sam, was preparing to tie the knot but hadn't yet saved enough for a house of his own. He asked if he and his new wife could stay with David and Emma for a while. Emma, ever practical, agreed, but with a condition. 3 months, she said. After that, you'll need to find your own place, whether it's buying or renting. Some might see this as strict, but Emma knew that too much togetherness would eventually strain their relationships. Different generations have different ways of living, she told Sam, and it's better for everyone if we respect that early on. Now, Jack lives about 10 kilometers away, while Sam bought an apartment just next door to his parents. It was close enough to visit frequently, but far enough for each family to maintain their space. Every weekend, David and Emma's home is filled with the laughter of their children and grandchildren. It's a lively scene, filled with warmth and connection. But during the week, David and Emma cherish their quiet time, their home remaining a sanctuary of peace and reflection. When friends or neighbors would ask if David and Emma ever considered moving in with their sons as they aged, they had a clear answer. "We plan to sell this big house when the time comes," David would say, "and move into a smaller, easier-to-manage apartment. The extra money will go toward our retirement. If we ever need help, we'll hire someone." Emma would nod in agreement, adding, "We won't burden the boys. They have their lives to live, and we have ours." On the other side of town, Emma's friend, Lila, had made a similar choice. Lila's two adult sons had both married and moved to the city, and they often asked her to come live with them. But Lila had grown attached to her life in the countryside. "I have friends here," she'd explain. "We meet for coffee, we share stories, and we keep each other company. In the city, I'd just be sitting behind closed doors all day, watching my sons leave for work and come home late, buried in their phones or laptops." When Lila did visit her sons, she noticed how busy and isolated city life had become. The hustle, the constant movement. It was a far cry from the slower, more connected life she cherished in her village. She'd see her sons briefly in the morning before they rushed off to work, and then again late at night when they returned, exhausted and preoccupied. "That's not the life for me," she'd say with a gentle smile. "I'd rather stay in the countryside where life is simpler and I feel truly at home." Lila knew that as she aged, she might need more help, but she had already made her plans. "If I get sick, I'll hire someone to care for me," she'd say confidently. "My sons can visit when they have time, but I won't depend on them to take care of me full time. That's not what they're meant to do, and it's not fair to them." These two stories, David and Emma's on one hand, and Lila's on the other, offer a powerful lesson about independence as we age. They show us that stepping back and allowing our children to build their own lives doesn't mean losing connection. It means fostering healthier relationships. By creating physical and emotional space, David, Emma, and Lila were able to maintain strong bonds with their children while also nurturing their own sense of self. You see, independence doesn't have to be an act of isolation. It can be an act of love, both for yourself and for your children. When we choose to live on our own terms, even in our later years, we preserve the dignity of our individuality. We continue to live life the way we've shaped it, not merely adapting to the needs or schedules of others. It's not about rejecting help. It's about thoughtfully deciding when and how that help is needed. David and Emma's decision to downsize their home and use the money for their own retirement wasn't just a financial choice. It was a symbol of their continued autonomy. They weren't afraid of getting older. They were simply preparing for it in a way that kept them in control. And Lila's choice to remain in her village wasn't an act of stubbornness. It was a recognition that, for her, the rhythms of rural life brought more joy and fulfillment than the fast pace of the city ever could. I can tell you that these kinds of decisions reflect a deep understanding of personal boundaries and emotional health. By maintaining independence, David, Emma, and Lila all safeguarded their mental well-being. They didn't wait for circumstances to force them into dependence. Instead, they proactively created environments where they could thrive, even in their later years. And this is where the story becomes truly impressive for us all. These parents, David, Emma, and Lila, didn't just think about their own comfort. They thought about their children too. They understood that by allowing their sons to have their own homes, they were fostering healthier, happier relationships. There was no resentment or pressure on either side. The time they spent together was cherished because it was a choice, not an obligation. When I share stories like these, it's not just about giving you a picture of what independence looks like. It's about helping you see that independence is a gift. It's something we give to ourselves and to those we love. And when we embrace it, we create room for deeper connection, for healthier relationships, and for a life lived fully on our terms. As you listen to this story, think about the lessons David, Emma, and Lila offer us. Think about what independence means for you and how you can apply this wisdom to your own life. Whether you're a parent, a son, or a daughter, remember that true love sometimes means letting go. Allowing space for each person to grow, to flourish, and to live in harmony with their own needs and desires. That's the real heart of this story, finding comfort, not in dependence, but in the beauty of living life independently, with grace, dignity, and a heart full of love. The third story is also something you have to pay close attention to, because it touches on a reality many of us might face someday, either for ourselves or for someone we love. Let's talk about Julia and her father, Paul. Paul was a man who had always been independent. He'd built a life for himself, raised his children with love, and after losing his wife, he found himself navigating the challenges of old age alone. As the years passed, it became clear to his daughter Julia that her father needed more help, more company, and a level of care that she wasn't sure how to provide, despite how much she wanted to. Julia loved her father deeply, and like many of us in that situation, she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She thought the natural thing to do would be to bring Paul into her home, to let him live with her and her family. In her mind, this was the best way to show her love and take care of him as he grew older. But Paul had different thoughts. He had no desire to be a burden on his children, even if they would never see him that way. One day, Paul gathered his children and told them about a decision he had made. He had chosen to move into a senior living community, and it caught Julia and her siblings off guard. They didn't understand why their father would want to live somewhere else when he could be surrounded by family. The initial reaction was confusion, maybe even a little hurt. "Dad, you don't have to do this," Julia said, trying to wrap her mind around what Paul was telling them. But Paul had made up his mind. He spoke calmly, explaining that he wanted to live somewhere he could have his own life, where he could be around people who understood the challenges and joys of growing older. "It's not about wanting to be away from you," he reassured them. "I just don't want to spend my days alone, waiting for you all to come home from work. I want to be with people who are in the same stage of life as me, people I can talk to, laugh with, and share this part of my journey with." Julia had never thought of it that way. She always assumed her father would want to be with family, that this was the best way to care for him. But as she listened, she realized Paul wasn't asking for permission, he was explaining his choice. He wanted more than just to be looked after. He wanted to keep living fully, and this was his way of doing it. At first, Julia struggled with the idea. It felt like she was failing him in some way, like she wasn't doing enough if he didn't want to live with her. But slowly, as she thought about his words, she began to understand. Paul wasn't rejecting his family. He was making a decision for himself, one that honored his need for independence and community. It wasn't about them, it was about him. When Paul moved into the senior living community, something remarkable happened. Julia saw her father come alive again. He made friends, participated in activities, and had a daily routine that filled his time with joy and connection. There was a spark in him that Julia hadn't seen in years. She realized that while her home might have offered comfort, it didn't provide the social interaction and stimulation that Paul craved. Paul would often tell Julia about the people he had met, other seniors with their own stories, their own lives, and their own experiences of aging. They had conversations that Julia and her siblings couldn't relate to, but that were deeply meaningful to Paul. It wasn't just about having a roof over his head. It was about feeling understood, about belonging to a community of people who knew what it meant to grow old together. Julia visited him often, and with each visit, she saw more clearly how happy he was. Paul wasn't just living in that community, he was thriving. He had activities to look forward to, meals shared with friends, and moments of laughter that filled his days with purpose. It wasn't the quiet, lonely life she had feared he might have. It was rich and full in a way she hadn't anticipated. As the holidays approached, Paul would come and stay with the family, just as he always had. They would celebrate together, share meals, and reminisce about old times. But when it was time for him to return to the senior living community, there was no sense of loss or sadness. Instead, there was an understanding between them, a recognition that Paul had chosen the path that made him happiest, and that was what truly mattered. Julia realized that caring for someone doesn't always mean keeping them close. Sometimes it means respecting their choices, even when those choices take them in a different direction than you had imagined. Paul wasn't choosing the senior living community to distance himself from his family. He was choosing it because it allowed him to live with dignity, independence, and joy. In time, Julia found peace with her father's decision. She saw that by choosing to live in that community, Paul had not only preserved his independence, but it also enriched his life in ways that she hadn't considered. He was surrounded by people who understood his world, who shared his experiences, and who gave him a sense of belonging that even his loving family couldn't provide in the same way. Paul's story teaches us something important about aging. It's not just about where we live, but how we live. It's about making decisions that allow us to continue being ourselves, even as the world around us changes. For Paul, that meant finding a place where he could feel alive again, where he could connect with others who shared his journey. This decision, while difficult for Julia at first, became a lesson in love and respect. She learned that letting go doesn't mean losing someone. It means allowing them the freedom to live their life in the way that brings them the most happiness. And for Paul, that happiness came from being part of a community that supported him, not just in his physical needs, but in his emotional and social ones too. So when you think about how you want to live as you grow older, or how you want to care for the people you love, remember Paul's story. Sometimes the best care we can give isn't about proximity or control. It's about allowing the people we love to make choices that reflect who they are and what they need. And that might mean letting them find a new home, one where they can truly flourish.